September 9th, 2025, precisely at 1923, a 40-year-old Su-24M undergoes its last pre-flight routines before embarking on one of the most demanding sorties of its service life. While ground technicians work with hydraulic jacks, two colossal Storm Shadow missiles, each around 1,300 kilograms, are secured beneath the aircraft's wings. Within each missile sit broach tandem warheads of roughly 450 kilograms engineered to punch through and collapse hardened shelters and reinforced concrete command centers from the inside out. As the jet taxis toward the runway carrying that lethal 2,600 kilogram burden, the crew watches the final lock indicator flash green and exchange a quiet, acknowledging nod. The designated target lies roughly 850 kilometers from the 7th Tactical Aviation Brigade base in Donetsk Oblast. For the Su-24's pilot, this mission ranks as the most perilous flight of his career. On paper, the Storm Shadow's 250-kilometer stated range offered a safety margin. In practice, it became a trap. To ensure target impact, the pilot would have to release warheads loaded with 450 kilograms of explosives from a standoff of only about 15 kilometers. A run that forced the aircraft into airspace densely covered by Russian air defenses and radar nets. Still, the Su-24 blasted off like an arrow and was airborne for roughly 35 minutes. A single error in that window could have spelled catastrophe for Ukrainian forces, because concurrently, a sizable armored mechanized formation from the Russian 41st Army and 20th Corps was gearing up for a major offensive toward Ukrainian advances along the Pokrovsk-Doylina line had created a sizable pocket, leaving two Russian regiments at risk of encirclement. Requests for reinforcement reached the 41st Army and the 20th Division. Behind the front, scores of T-90 tanks, BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles, and self-propelled howitzers amassed for a counterstrike on Pokrovsk, while fuel and ammunition convoys queued to resupply. But that assault would falter before a single tank could roll. The Russian High Command had committed a grave blunder. The previous day, Ukraine's Hortitsia M land-based electronic warfare and signals intelligence system registered anomalously high data traffic on certain channels used by senior Russian staff. Russian officers had been operating in familiar patterns, unaware that their voice traffic and data streams were being intercepted and catalogued. The signals converged at two locations: the Topaz radio electronics plant in the city's north and the vast Donetsk metallurgical works downtown. Shark reconnaissance drones were immediately vectored to the sector, loitering at 15,000 feet with high-powered optical zoom. Their prolonged surveillance produced visual verification of vehicle rotations and the escort details of senior officers arriving at and departing those facilities. Shark drones supplied visual verification that the two industrial sites served as the command hubs for the 41st Army and the 20th Division. In the same fashion, Ukrainian units had observed preparations of the vast mechanized tank convoys slated for an assault. Yet, stopping the enormous Russian tank column would not be achieved by striking the column itself, nor by confronting it directly at the front. Ukrainian forces lacked time for elaborate counterattacks or ambushes. The strategy was far bolder and far more cunning. To remove the source of the onrush, the pair of brains orchestrating it simultaneously with a single pinpoint strike. Consequently, the sole viable option was a successful launch from the Su-24. Donetsk and its environs lay under a mesh of Russia's most sophisticated layered air defense networks, such as the S-300 and S-400. Storm Shadow missiles cruise marginally below sound at roughly Mach 0.8 to 0.95, firing them from maximum standoff distance, supposedly safe posture, would have granted Russian radars and interceptors a roughly 15-minute window to detect, track, and eliminate those slow, steady threats. That reality implied the plan would collapse before it ever swung into action. The fix rested on that thin margin between recklessness and valor. The missile's flight time to under 1 minute. He would release the munitions about 15 kilometers from the aim point and somehow escape the locus alive, solo without a fighter screen. His solitary shield would be the airframe's low-altitude prowess, NATO-enhanced ECM suites, and the deadly orchestra, soon to convulse the Donetsk airspace. Applause, the Su-24 catapulted off the runway like a bolt and vanished into the night, bearing its twin 1,300-kilogram lethal loads. Moments after rotation, the pilot shoved the stick forward, driving the jet earthward. At an altitude of scarcely 50 to 60 meters, it skimmed beneath tree crowns, nearly brushing the cockpit side window and power cables, exploiting the terrain's radar gaps. This was the Su-24's forte, a modern terrain-following radar grafted onto its aging frame, teamed with digital mapping, made it virtually undetectable to Russian radar. A true phantom. Still, the pilot's fate hinged completely on flawless orchestration across the entire architecture, dozens of UAV and the Kiev control node. Coordination of decoy and deception drones was essential to the mission's success. Multiple UAV types launched from separate covert sites across Ukraine like sections of a grand orchestra. Simultaneously, Ukraine's latest 3 jet-driven Peklo cruise missiles were also fired. They were not mere feints. They acted as assault vanguards, arriving seconds before the principal blow. Their objectives matched those assigned to the Storm Shadows. 2 strikes on the 41st Army headquarters and 1 on the 20th Division HQ. Their role was to sow panic and disorder by delivering initial damage, forcing command personnel into shelters, and crucially drawing Russian attention toward themselves, buying the Su-24 pilot priceless seconds. These fleeting moments, measured in heartbeats and instrument readings, would determine whether the sortie ended in triumphant success or catastrophic failure, and they represented the narrow bridge between survival and annihilation for the lone air crew. The deception, electronic masking, and kinetic shock were timed to the second, a synchronized barrage of false returns, jamming bursts and strikes to fracture command cohesion, blind responses. The Peklo missile drones were escorted by a formation of 15 UJ-26 Beaver and RAM-2X kamikaze drones cruising at medium height. Their task was straightforward: saturate the radar consoles of Pantsir and Tor batteries with false tracks, overwhelm operators with phantom signals, and compel them into fatal errors. Within this swarm, 7 UJ-26 Beavers carried out a more specialized role. Their intended marks were the power distribution nodes and backup UPS chambers of local radar control centers. The aim was not to plunge the grid into a full-scale blackout, but to carve out localized blind zones, fleeting disruptions in data streams lasting mere seconds, yet decisive for the mission. This intricate choreography was directed live from a hardened underground command post in Kiev, connected through encrypted satellite channels. On massive screens, icons representing Su-24s, kamikaze swarms, and Peklo missiles advanced steadily into concentric red circles marking Russian radar envelopes. The kamikaze formations gave themselves away with erratic altitude changes and abrupt course shifts, adding to the clutter. Russian radar crews suddenly faced an onslaught of simultaneous echoes, false signatures, and interference. The first kamikaze wave faltered, failing to lock on and leaving a 20-second disruption while operators scrambled to reconfigure frequency bands. What seemed to the defenders like a brief respite was, in fact, a deliberate layer of confusion. Meanwhile, 7 beavers pressed low, slipping beneath detection nets. Within minutes, 2 confirmed strikes echoed across the Ukrainian net. Kamikaze drones had destroyed 2 separate radar outposts and a mobile command and control vehicle. The breach tore a momentary gap into Russia's defensive screen, a blind corridor lasting just over a minute. It was the exact opening the Su-24 pilot had been waiting for. He drove the bomber full throttle into the void, skimming terrain, but peril still shadowed him. A Russian Bereev, a 50 AWACS orbiting high overhead, picked up the Su-24's heat plume, relaying coordinates to a nearby S-400 battery. The pilot's headset shrieked with the piercing tone of radar lock. Acting on instinct, he yanked the stick back nearly vertical bleeding speed while hammering the chaff/flare release. Metal shards and magnesium bursts cascaded behind, confusing the seeker of an incoming 48N6E interceptor. The missile veered toward the decoy cloud, detonating in a violent fireball kilometers away. In seconds, life and death had wrestled over the skies. Surviving the strike, the pilot dropped back to treetop altitude. As the Peklos neared their targets, the trio approached Donetsk along separate vectors. One was intercepted 8 kilometers out by a Tor battery, another fell 12 kilometers away to a Pantsir. Twin fireballs illuminated the night, but the last slipped through unscathed, penetrating the city. Slammed into the communications tower perched atop the Topaz plant, home to the 41st Army's headquarters. Its 50-kilogram warhead ripped the tower apart like splintered timber, severing the command's primary link with external forces and plunging the HQ into chaos and panic. Russian officers and air defense crews had fixed their full concentration on the sudden, unforeseen strike. Sirens wailed across the sector as personnel scrambled to grasp the unfolding crisis. That single hit shattered the rigid tempo inside command posts. It was the very window Ukraine had been waiting for. Amid the turmoil, panic, and severed links, the Storm Shadow missiles had the perfect cloak. The Su-24 pilot had reached the release zone. Overhead, live imagery from a loitering shark drone confirmed both sites were active and that senior commanders were present inside. From Kiev, the final order came as a single word: fire. The 2 Storm Shadows slipped cleanly off the wings, beginning their autonomous lethal arcs as they powered toward their marks. The pilot hauled the jet into a violent turn, ringing every limit of the frame, then dropped again to treetop level to vanish into the dark chaos he had unleashed. 35 seconds later, the first missile slammed into the 41st Army's hardened bunker under the Topaz plant. Laser guidance from the Shark drone steered it into the main ventilation shaft. Dozens of meters underground, the warhead erupted amidst the assembled general staff. With no outlet, the shockwave ricocheted inside the bunker's concrete shell, pulverizing everything: equipment, plans, even reinforced walls into fragments. 43 seconds afterward, the second Storm Shadow reached the 20th Division's headquarters at the metallurgical complex. Its broach warhead functioned with surgical precision. A precursor charge pierced multiple reinforced concrete layers, carving a channel for the main 450-kilogram explosive. Milliseconds later, it plunged through and detonated in the command center's core. The colossal pressure surge roared upward and outward through every floor. The steel frame held for a moment, then yielded under its own burden, collapsing in a colossal fireball of dust, flames, and smoke, consuming all within. Moscow's immediate instinct was to mask the panic and conceal the devastation. By nightfall, Spetsnaz and FSB cordons sealed off both sites, blocking every road. Floodlights illuminated recovery crews as debris clearance began under strict secrecy. Yet the unceasing Ambulance sirens, fire trucks rushing in, heavy machines clawing rubble until dawn, and traffic closures betrayed the scale of the disaster.